The Clockmaker'S Code. Man Detective Chapter 1, The Explosion on Worthington Street. The dawn of December 3, 1873, broke cold and brittle across Chicago, with a thin veil of frost clinging to every iron railing and lamppost. At precisely 7:12 a.m., a thunderous boom ripped through the silence of Worthington Street. Windows shattered, bricks rained down, and smoke belched skyward in a spiraling column of gray. The explosion originated from a modest corner building, a clockmaker's workshop bearing the weathered sign, Gruber and Sons, Horologists. By the time the fire brigade arrived, flames had devoured most of the wooden interior. Neighbors stood bundled in shawls and coats, mouths agape. Some whispered prayers. Others held handkerchiefs to their noses. When the flames were subdued, what remained inside was blackened ruin, and one corpse. It lay crumpled near the smoldering forge, identifiable only by the melted brass-rimmed spectacles fused to the skull. "All that's left of Mr. Gruber," muttered Marshal Elias Brodie, spitting tobacco into the snow. "Damn shame. Fine clockmaker," they said. But grief wasn't the only emotion among the crowd. There was fear. Within an hour, a special request was telegraphed to the renowned Allan Pinkerton, founder of the famed National Detective Agency. The marshal had little faith in coincidences, especially when the widow of the deceased insisted, in hushed tones, that her husband had feared for his life. Pinkerton arrived by noon. A tall man in a thick black coat, his once coal dark hair now gray at the temples, he walked with a purpose unbroken by age. His Scottish accent softened but still distinct, he surveyed the ruined workshop with a sharp, methodical eye. By his side was Hiram Bell, one of his most trusted agents, shorter, younger, with a restless energy and eyes that missed nothing. Inside the shop, the scent of scorched wood and metal lingered in the air like a ghost. Bent gears, shattered glass, and disfigured watch faces littered the floor. Pinkerton moved past the crime scene rope, nodding to the fire marshal, and bent to examine the corner where the forge once stood. "Furnace rupture?" asked Hiram. Pinkerton said nothing at first. Instead, he picked up a deformed piece of metal from the floor. It was cylindrical and sharp at one end, like the tip of a hollow pipe, but with grooves too precise to be forged by accident. He held it up. "No furnace creates this," he murmured. They continued their inspection and soon found something peculiar. Beneath the floorboards near the back of the shop, hidden behind a cabinet now partially collapsed, Hiram spotted a metal box scorched but intact. Inside, there was a bundle of burned parchment, a scorched book, and what appeared to be a folded blueprint. Pinkerton opened the box and examined the book. A ledger, partially burned. Some entries were lost, but others survived. December 1st, JL, $150, delivery confirmed. November 24th, MH, $400, final components complete. October 30th, X, $500, no name, no address. "What do you make of it?" Hiram asked. "Codes. Initials, perhaps," Pinkerton replied. "Names of clients. But this one," he tapped the X entry, "anonymous and recent. That's our lead." Pinkerton and Hiram next visited Annalise Gruber, the widow. She was a dignified woman in her late 50s, with soft features and a trembling voice. He knew someone was watching him, she said, seated stiffly in her parlor with her hands clutched around a teacup. He was frightened for weeks. Said they wanted his secret. I didn't understand. Did he mention names? Pinkerton asked. She hesitated. Only once. A man named Johann Lenz. He used to work with my husband before the war. But they quarreled, something about an invention. Hiram raised a brow. Invention? She nodded. A lock. A vault mechanism. Ernest said it would make everything else obsolete. He called it his final design. Said it could change the world. Pinkerton frowned. And who knew about this design? Only Johann. And his apprentice. They asked for the apprentice's name. She replied, Michael Dancer, a young man who had worked with Gruber until 2 months ago before suddenly quitting. According to Mrs. Gruber, he had become paranoid, convinced someone was following him. He'd fled the city. Pinkerton made a note. They returned to the agency's Chicago office to review the findings. Pinkerton laid out the warped metal fragment, the ledger, and the half-burned blueprint on his desk. The blueprint depicted the partial design of a mechanical vault door, unlike any Pinkerton had seen. 12 tumblers, arranged in a circle like a clock face. Hiram stared. It's not just a vault, it's a clock. Pinkerton nodded. A time-based locking system. Perhaps one that only opens at a precise moment. Ingenious, and dangerous. That evening, a telegram arrived from one of Pinkerton's contacts in Washington, D.C. It stated, Subject Gruber previously detained in 1866 under suspicion of aiding Prussian spy Johann Lenz. Charges dropped. Watch list again in 1872 after transatlantic correspondences resumed. Further details classified. Pinkerton leaned back in his chair. A dead clockmaker, a burned-out shop, a secret invention, and a dead connection to a known foreign agent. It wasn't just a case of arson anymore. It was espionage. And possibly sabotage. We follow the money, Pinkerton said. To Johann Lenz? Hiram asked. To wherever this mechanism was meant to be built. If someone went this far to kill Gruber, they'll go even further to steal what's left. Pinkerton picked up the scorched metal fragment one more time. The grooves now looked less like tool marks, and more like the teeth of a gear. A gear that belonged to a much larger, hidden machine. Chapter 2, The Ledger in the Ashes. 2 days after the Worthington Street explosion, the snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing Chicago in a hush that contrasted bitterly with the violence of Ernest Gruber's death. In the dim warmth of his agency office, Allan Pinkerton examined the remnants of the Clockmaker's ledger by oil lamp. Several entries were too scorched to read, but those that remained hinted at something far larger than a secret lock mechanism. The name that stood out again and again was J.L., likely Johann Lenz, Gruber's estranged associate. Other entries marked with initials were coupled with transaction amounts and locations. M.H. listed next to a warehouse near the docks, K.S. beside a freight company operating out of St. Louis. This is no ordinary sales journal, Pinkerton muttered. It's a trail. Hiram Bell entered with 2 steaming cups of coffee, snow still flecking his shoulders. Just came from the harbor office, he said. Argentum Freight has a manifest showing a crate shipped last month under Gruber's name. Destination, Lockport. Lockport? Pinkerton narrowed his eyes. That's canal territory. Good for hiding things, or smuggling them. And get this, Hiram added, the delivery was received by a man named Johann Lenz. Signed in full. That was all Pinkerton needed. By the next morning, the 2 men boarded a southbound train. Lockport lay some 60 miles away, nestled along the Illinois and Michigan Canal. The trip was slow, but uneventful, and by early afternoon, they disembarked into a grimy town lined with smoke-stained brick and frostbitten shopfronts. The old Lens Clockworks factory stood on the edge of town, abandoned and brooding, its once grand tower leaning slightly eastward like a drunken prayer. Locals referred to it as the Tickless Tower. "It's been shut for months," said the station agent. "Owner went missing, workers let go without notice. Shame, those clocks ran half the state." Inside, the factory was hollow with dust and shadows. The vast machinery stood motionless, gears rusting where they once spun. Rats darted across the floors. But it was in the factory's basement, hidden behind a shelf of gear molds, that Pinkerton found the first true lead. A reinforced vault door, circular in design, stood embedded into the far wall. 12 dials, each marked with Roman numerals I through 12, ringed the outer frame. It was unfinished, wires protruded, cogs lay stacked in crates, but it was unmistakable. "This is Gruber's design," Hiram whispered. Beside the vault, pinned to a workbench, lay a bundle of drawings and a torn letter written in thick, slanted ink. "E. The 12 alignments must be hidden. They will misuse it. This lock was never meant to guard treasure, it holds something worse. I fear they've found our buyer." "J. Something worse?" Hiram asked aloud. Pinkerton didn't answer. He flipped through the blueprints. The mechanism was intricate, unlike any vault he'd ever seen. It wasn't just a safe, it was a puzzle. A riddle in metal. One page had a strange annotation, Vault Number 3, calibrate to astronomical passage. Use chart B. Planetary charts, Pinkerton said slowly. He designed it to open on a celestial rhythm. As they turned to leave, a rustling noise echoed from above. Both men drew revolvers. "Factory's empty," Hiram said, low. "Not anymore." A figure darted past the broken stairwell, bootsteps echoing through the rafters. Pinkerton gave chase. Hiram circled around the front. The intruder led them through the rafters and out onto the second-level gantry. At the last moment, the man leapt through a smashed window, landing hard on a cart of hay below and rolling to his feet. "Dancer!" Hiram shouted, recognizing the lanky frame. "Michael Dancer!" The apprentice bolted down the alley. They followed but lost him in the maze of crumbling warehouses. Still, his identity was a breakthrough. Gruber's apprentice, scared enough to flee, was now snooping around a factory with a sealed vault and plans referencing cosmic events. Clearly, Dancer knew something. That night, Pinkerton sat at his desk in the rented Lockport Inn. He spread out the ledger and drawings, aligning dates and names. The coded entries followed a pattern. Every few weeks, a new transaction to JL or MH, all leading up to Gruber's final, anonymous payment. But something was strange. The dates weren't random. "These payments," Pinkerton muttered, "they match lunar phases." He pulled a calendar and checked. November 24th was a full moon. October 30th was a waxing crescent. Gruber hadn't been designing for secrecy. He had been designing for timing. Hiram returned with grim news. Marshal Brody sent a wire. Michael Dancer's body was pulled from the canal in Joliet this morning. Gunshot to the back of the head. No ID, but matches the description. Pinkerton exhaled sharply. Whoever's behind this is eliminating loose ends. And moving fast, Hiram added. That vault's unfinished, but someone's building a second. Pinkerton stood and looked out into the icy night. Smoke rose from a canal barge in the distance. "They're not after money," he said finally. "They're after something time-sensitive." But what could it be? Pinkerton's expression darkened. That's what we'll find in Chicago. They boarded the next morning's train back to the city with a sense of urgency, and the knowledge that the final gear was already turning. Chapter 3, The Man at Lockport. The return to Chicago was uneventful, but Allan Pinkerton's mind was not at rest. The unfinished vault in the basement of Lenz's factory had been more than an engineering curiosity, it was a warning. And the murder of Michael Dancer confirmed the truth Pinkerton always feared: someone powerful was watching every move they made. Back at the agency, Hiram set to work compiling background checks on every name in Gruber's ledger. Pinkerton, meanwhile, wrote a letter to a trusted contact in Washington, Colonel Jasper Keene of Army Intelligence. If a weapon was being designed using time and celestial alignment, it may no longer be just a detective's concern. It could be a threat to national security. By evening, a wire came through. From C. Keene to A. Pinkerton. Re. Lenz/Gruber. J.L. formerly head of European Military Engineering Bureau. Vanished in 1867. Suspected in creation of prototype astrolock system. Blueprints smuggled to U.S. Use extreme caution. Foreign interests involved. Pinkerton read it twice. Astrolock, he muttered. So this really is about more than gold and gears. That night, Pinkerton and Hiram paid a discreet visit to the Chicago Observatory, located atop the old Sheridan building. They met with a man named Professor Abelson, an astronomer who had worked with law enforcement before. This design here, Pinkerton said, spreading out the vault sketch, matches the arrangement of stars and lunar cycles. Could it be that this vault can only be opened under specific cosmic conditions? Abelson adjusted his spectacles and traced the dials. Each number correlates with a planetary body. 12 tumblers, 12 hours of the zodiac, or perhaps 12 conjunctions. Yes, yes. This is an astronomical lock. Time-based and predictive. Whoever built this wanted it to open only at a moment they could predict, but others could not. Could it be used to set something off? Hiram asked. Abelson hesitated. It could. If tied to a chemical or magnetic reaction, it could trigger an event at a predetermined time. A sort of celestial fuse. Pinkerton nodded grimly. Then it isn't just a vault. It's a bomb. The next morning, Pinkerton received another tip. An anonymous note slid under the agency's door. Seek the man with the silver gloves. He holds the master key. Below the message was a location, South Side Rail Yards, midnight. Pinkerton prepared cautiously. He and Hiram arrived just before midnight, wearing long coats and gloves. The rail yard was shrouded in fog, with engines groaning and hissing under the pressure of late-night shipments. A single lantern swayed from a signal post, casting shifting shadows across the ground. Then they saw him, a man in a gray overcoat, silver gloves glinting faintly under the lamplight. He walked briskly down the track, clutching a leather case. Pinkerton gave the signal. They moved. But before they could reach the man, 2 gunshots split the air. The stranger jerked, stumbled forward, and collapsed face-first onto the tracks. 2 figures bolted from the shadows and vanished between freight cars. Pinkerton rushed forward, flipping the man over. He was young, early 30s, with blood soaking through his cravat. He struggled to breathe. With shaking fingers, he pushed the leather case into Pinkerton's hands and whispered one word. Argentum. Then he died. Inside the case was a silver gear key, crafted precisely with 12 interlocking teeth, like spokes of a celestial wheel. It glimmered like mercury. A master key, Hiram said. But what does it open? Pinkerton turned the gear in his gloved hands. Not what. When. They returned to the agency in silence. Hours later, an address emerged from an investigation into the name Argentum Freight, a small warehouse near Goose Island, listed under an alias for a known arms supplier, Cornelius Brandt. Brandt had no official connection to Lenz or Gruber. But he had a history of acquiring dangerous prototypes, always through shell companies. He was wealthy, protected, and feared. Pinkerton knew what this meant. Someone intended to build a complete astrolock device, one capable not just of timed access but of automated destruction. Whether for ransom, sabotage, or political terror, the motive didn't matter. The device had to be stopped. Pinkerton stood by the fireplace, staring into the dancing flames. If Brandt gets this key, he said quietly, he won't use it to open anything. He'll use it to kill. Hiram exhaled. Then we bring the fight to him. Pinkerton turned toward the window, eyes narrowing at the snowy streets of Chicago. The gears were moving faster now. Time was running out. Chapter 4, The Cryptic Cipher. Snow fell in thick sheets across the cobbled streets of Chicago as Allan Pinkerton prepared for what he knew would be a turning point. The silver gear key, delivered by a dying man, was more than a clue. It was a warning. Whoever controlled the key controlled a machine designed to obey celestial precision. And somewhere, that machine was being rebuilt. Back in the Pinkerton Agency's headquarters, the mood was tense. Operative Hiram Bell was reviewing shipping records from Argentum Freight, while Pinkerton reached out to an old friend, Professor Lawrence Tibbs, a cryptologist and mathematician who'd assisted the War Department during the Civil War. By candlelight, they spread the ledgers, blueprints, and the silver key across the table. This symbol here, Tibbs said, tapping a triangular mark etched into the corner of Gruber's ledger, isn't just decoration. It's a cipher identifier, a type used by secret societies in Bavaria. And here, see this date? It aligns not with the calendar, but with a lunar eclipse. Pinkerton narrowed his eyes. You're telling me the entries are encoded in astronomy? Not just astronomy. Planetary movement, lunar phases, solar transitions. Whoever designed this was building not a vault, but a mechanical calendar capable of aligning with the heavens, and unlocking something only at that moment. And if someone calculates the wrong moment? Hiram asked. Then the system may assume forced entry, and destroy itself, or its contents. Pinkerton leaned forward, examining the cipher. This isn't a lock. It's a trigger. With Tibbs' help, Pinkerton deciphered a recurring sequence tied to 12 initials. Each matched one of the 12 tumblers from the blueprints. One stood out, EX, the last entry in the ledger, paired with the phrase, Final Delivery, Target Aligned. Hiram stared at the page. Final delivery? Pinkerton straightened. It's already been assembled. They've set the mechanism. And if they've set it, Tibbs added, then there's a countdown in motion. That evening, an informant returned with new intelligence. One of Brandt's freight containers had been moved, without official papers, to a disused rail tunnel beneath Lake Street, part of an unfinished underground project halted during the fire of '71. Pinkerton decided to move immediately. Armed with revolvers, lanterns, and Tibbs's decoded chart, Pinkerton and Hiram descended into the tunnel system. It was pitch dark and choked with damp and dust. Rats scurried past their boots. They moved slowly, careful not to alert anyone ahead. After nearly an hour, they heard it, the faint rhythmic clicking of gears. They rounded a corner, and there it was. A second vault. Fully assembled. Mounted within a reinforced iron casing, with 12 gleaming tumblers and a pressure valve leading to crates of what appeared to be liquid accelerants, possibly nitroglycerin. A small brass plate above the dials read, "Do not turn before full alignment. Failure to obey sequence will trigger release." There was no doubt. This was no bank vault. It was a bomb. Pinkerton exhaled, slowly. "They've weaponized the design." Using Tibbs's cipher and the positioning chart, they determined that the machine would reach its alignment point in just 4 days, precisely midnight on the winter solstice. And it wasn't just a random date. "It's the longest night of the year," Pinkerton murmured. "They want maximum confusion and devastation." Hiram found a nearby journal tucked in a crate. Inside, an entry read, "Cornelius says the vault is the perfect solution, no fuse, no timer, just the stars. No trace, no witness. The city will believe it was natural gas. The banks will fall like dominoes. And the buyer from Prague? He's already paid half." Pinkerton's fists clenched. "He's going to blow up half of Chicago. They had 4 days to stop it." But dismantling it was not an option, not without knowing the sequence. They needed leverage. And leverage meant confronting Cornelius Brandt directly. Chapter 5, The Body in the Vault. The air in the Lake Street tunnels remained thick with coal dust and the sour scent of fuel as Allan Pinkerton and Hiram Bell emerged from the darkness and into the Chicago dawn. The second astral vault had confirmed their worst fear. The mechanism had been rebuilt, weaponized, and primed to detonate at midnight on the solstice, just 4 days away. They returned to the Pinkerton office to regroup. There, Professor Tibbs continued his calculations on the celestial timing mechanism while agents combed the city for anyone linked to Cornelius Brandt, arms dealer, industrialist, and now, suspected orchestrator of a plot to annihilate part of the city. The problem was, Brandt was insulated by layers of legality and influence. He owned steelworks, rail companies, and had powerful friends in the city council. No one could touch him without hard proof. So Pinkerton devised a trap. A rumor was planted in the Chicago Tribune, whispered through reliable backchannels. A third astral key, previously believed lost in the Great Fire, had resurfaced and would be held for safekeeping inside the vault of the Metropolitan Security Bank. The article suggested it was recovered from Gruber's old shop, restored, untraceable, and priceless. The bait was set. 2 nights later, the alarm tripped at 2:43 a.m. Pinkerton and Hiram rushed to the scene. The bank's lower vault was sealed shut from the inside. No forced entry. No one entered or exited the building. The guards had been drugged with laudanum in their tea. And one of the side windows had been jimmied open, just enough for a slender man to slip through. After 2 hours of careful lock manipulation and external override, the vault door finally hissed open. Inside, they found the body. A man lay slumped against the far wall, curled on his side like he'd fallen mid-crawl. His gloves were off, fingers scraped and bloodied from trying to claw at the hinges. His face was frozen in panic. "Malcolm Hargrove," Hiram whispered. "Ex-bank inspector. Expelled 3 years ago for embezzlement. He worked security systems," Pinkerton said. "Which means Brandt used him to break in." Beside Hargrove's body was a half-burned candle, a snapped wire hook, and a journal page clutched in his hand. Pinkerton took it, squinting at the ink-stained scrawl. "Vault lock incomplete. Couldn't simulate full alignment. We were wrong. It's not just a lock, it's a fuse box. They lied. Vault number 2 is primed. 12 tumblers to full. At 12, the city dies." Pinkerton turned to Hiram, jaw clenched. This was a test. Hargrove was sent to steal a key or confirm the system was safe to tamper with. But the mechanism punished deviation. Now they know it works. And now they know we're watching, Hiram added. Pinkerton ordered the body photographed and the vault sealed again. They returned to the office with rising urgency. The only option now was to confront Brandt directly, and that required evidence strong enough to make him crack. At midday, Pinkerton received an unmarked envelope by courier. Inside was a photograph, an old one, of Ernest Gruber, Johann Lenz, and a third man, Cornelius Brandt. All three stood beside a brass vault face and a set of 12 dials. Gruber looked tense. Lenz looked nervous. Brandt looked proud. A handwritten caption beneath it read, Project Ouroboros, Vienna, 1865. The implications were stunning. Brandt hadn't stolen the design, he'd helped create it. That night, under cover of a winter storm, Pinkerton and Hiram infiltrated one of Brandt's Southside steel foundries, where the final vault components were rumored to have been forged. Disguised in workers' coats, they slipped through the rear service gate and entered the machine floor. Inside a back office, Pinkerton uncovered several crates marked scrap gears, but inside were finely machined parts, identical to the tumblers used in the astral vaults. And on a workbench was a duplicate silver key. The solstice is 3 nights away, Hiram said. If we don't stop him now, we won't get another chance. Pinkerton took the duplicate key and slipped the original into its place. We give him what he's expecting, he said. And when he uses it, we'll be waiting. Chapter 6, The Girl in the Gear Shop. The next morning, Pinkerton's office was quiet except for the ticking of a single brass clock above the fireplace, a gift from an old client. Snow clung to the city like fog to a tombstone, and the solstice loomed just 2 nights away. Pinkerton examined the replacement key they had swapped at Brandt's foundry. It was a masterful forgery, indistinguishable to the untrained eye. But the original key, now safe in the vault of a nearby church under Pinkerton agent guard, would never find its way into Brandt's hands. He poured a cup of coffee and reviewed the files again. There was something nagging at him, an edge to the cipher entries in Gruber's ledger that he hadn't noticed before. The symbols. The repeated triangle with a single dot. The phrase, 12 completes the circle. These weren't just mechanical notations. They were religious. Or, cultic. At that moment, the front door creaked open. Hiram poked his head in. You'll want to meet her, he said. He stepped aside, revealing a young woman bundled in a wool coat and scarf, cheeks flushed from the cold. Her dark eyes were sharp, her accent faintly Bavarian. My name is Elise Lenz, she said, removing her gloves. Johann Lenz was my uncle. Pinkerton stood slowly. We thought Johann vanished. He did, she said. And now I believe they've killed him. She sat, and in slow, measured words, told her story. Her father and Johann had worked together in Vienna on military engineering projects, including the prototype that became the Astrolock. After the Austro-Prussian War, Johann fled to America, fearing their design would be turned into a weapon. My uncle believed time could be used to control power, Elise explained. The lock was never about protection. It was about triggering events, based on celestial movement. A machine that follows the heavens, opens at one precise moment, and releases something. Gas. Fire. Collapse. Pinkerton listened intently. And why come now? She reached into her satchel and drew out a brass locket. Inside was a faded map, lines of star alignments overlaid on a grid of Chicago. This map, she said, was mailed to me 2 weeks ago. No note. No return address. But I believe it came from my uncle. And it shows a second detonation site. Pinkerton spread the map on the table. It pinpointed a building near the river, the old Icarus grain mill, abandoned since the fire of '71. Pinkerton's heart thudded. The tunnels pass beneath it. If there are 2 devices, Hiram said, they mean to collapse both the financial district and the grain stores. Starve the city and bankrupt it. And Brant walks away, Pinkerton muttered, as the only man with a working prototype, ready to sell it overseas. Pinkerton stood, suddenly decisive. We stop him now. That night, Pinkerton, Hiram, and Elise, armed with the original star map and the tampered key, descended once more into the underground tunnels. They approached the Icarus mill through the riverbank hatch. The cold seeped into their bones as they moved through brick tunnels, lit only by lantern glow and dripping water. Finally, they reached it. The second device. This one was complete. Mounted against the tunnel wall, it gleamed under the lantern. Its 12 dials were already aligned to 11. Only one remained. Elise examined the gear socket. This isn't just a trigger, she whispered. It's a synchronizer. Turn the dial, and both devices activate together. Then the whole plan hinges on one moment, Pinkerton said. One action. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind them. Men with pistols emerged, for in total, faces hidden beneath scarves. One stepped forward. His voice was smooth, but ice-cold. You weren't supposed to find this, Mr. Pinkerton. It was Cornelius Brant himself. Step away from the device, he ordered. You can't stop it. Pinkerton slowly raised his hands. I believe you're looking for this, he said, holding up the silver key. Brant's eyes glittered. You brought it, he said. And now you'll hand it over. Pinkerton's grip tightened around the fake key. Behind him, Elise whispered, he doesn't know we switched it. Pinkerton took a breath. And then flung the key down the dark tunnel. It clattered and vanished into the sewer abyss. Brant roared, stepping forward, too late. Elise moved like lightning. She pulled a second gear from her coat, a rigged duplicate, and slammed it into the socket. The vault's tumblers began to spin. Get down! Pinkerton shouted. He, Hiram, and Elise dove as the machine groaned, then jerked to a halt. A red light blinked once. Twice. Then died. Silence. Pinkerton stood slowly, heart pounding. The fake gear had triggered a failsafe, a mechanism they'd built with Tibbs to overload the tumblers. The device was dead. So were Brant's plans. Brant turned to run, only to find Hiram's revolver aimed squarely at his head. You're done, Hiram growled. Chapter 7, The Final Countdown. The wind howled like a banshee across the rooftops of Chicago as the longest night of the year began. December 21st, winter solstice. Midnight loomed like a guillotine blade, poised to fall. The city, unaware, glittered beneath gas lamps and snowflakes. But in the underbelly of Chicago, inside a fortified tunnel chamber beneath Goose Island, a race against the stars was nearing its end. Allan Pinkerton stood inside the chamber housing the first astral vault, the one they had found days ago. Though Cornelius Brant had been captured and handed over to federal agents, his device remained active. The second vault had been rendered inert, thanks to Elise's rigged gear insertion, but this one was still ticking. We've tampered with nothing, Pinkerton said to the small group of operatives and experts behind him. We only have one shot. Professor Tibbs consulted the ciphered star charts again, using an orrery and a set of finely calibrated lenses to calculate the exact alignment. His hands trembled slightly as he placed the final coordinates. "It begins in less than 2 hours," he said. "The tumblers will auto-align at 11:56. By 12 o'clock, if untouched, it will trigger." "And if we try to force the alignment early?" Hiram asked. Tibbs shook his head. "The device will interpret it as tampering and detonate." Elise was already at the base of the mechanism, studying the copper filaments that surrounded the dials. "These were made for precision," she said. "But they weren't made for sabotage." Pinkerton knelt beside her, eyes fixed on the 12 interlocked rings. "This is a clock, a vault, and a weapon," he said softly. "So we beat it at its own game." The plan was simple in theory and perilous in execution. Elise would reverse engineer the calibration from the back panel while Pinkerton manually delayed the tumblers from the front, stalling the last alignment just long enough for Tibbs to insert a scrambled sequence override key. They had crafted it earlier that day, a jagged mock gear cut to misalign the final tumbler just a fraction of a second before full alignment. If it worked, the device would lock in place permanently. If it didn't, the entire chamber, and everyone in it, would vanish in fire. The minutes passed like hours. At 11:30, Elise signaled she was ready. At 11:45, the copper wires around the tumblers began to pulse, reacting to gravitational and magnetic shifts imperceptible to man, but obeyed by the vault. At 11:50, the first 10 tumblers clicked into place, one by one, their soft metallic clinks echoing like gunshots in the tunnel. Sweat rolled down Hiram's temple. At 11:55, the 11th tumbler snapped into place. The final dial, 12, remained. Elise whispered, "Now." Pinkerton inserted his fingers into the rim grooves of the final dial, applying backward tension just enough to create drag. The tumbler resisted. Then shuddered. The mechanism groaned. Inside the casing, gears strained against gears. Something sparked. "Do it!" Pinkerton barked. Tibbs darted forward, holding the override gear in shaking hands. He placed it into the socket behind the faceplate. There was a single, grinding whir. Then, silence. The final dial froze, one tick short of midnight. The lights dimmed. And the entire mechanism shut down. No explosion. No collapse. Just the sound of breath being held, and slowly exhaled. Pinkerton sat back against the tunnel wall, lungs burning. Elise was pale but smiling faintly. Tibbs collapsed into a nearby crate, eyes wide. "We stopped time," Hiram whispered. "No," Pinkerton replied, voice hoarse. "We stopped a man from misusing it." Within an hour, federal agents descended on the location. The vault was sealed permanently, and the tunnel access was ordered destroyed. A team of Army engineers would dismantle the vault, piece by piece, and send it to Washington. Brandt, under arrest, had already begun naming names, foreign buyers, bankers, and smugglers tied to the astrolock trade. He would spend the rest of his life in a military prison. The following morning, as snow finally ceased its assault on the city, Pinkerton stood beside Elise at the site of Gruber's old shop. It had been leveled, but the cellar remained, charred but intact. "He was trying to warn us," Elise said softly. "In his own way. My uncle wasn't mad, he just knew what this thing could become." Pinkerton nodded. "He died trying to stop it. And you helped finish what he started." She turned to him, grateful. "So what now?" Pinkerton looked out at the city, smokestacks, frost-covered rooftops, carriages clattering through slush. "Now," he said, "we tell the truth." Chapter 8, The Man Behind the Gears. The newspapers made no mention of astral vaults, celestial weapons, or coded clocks. The official story pinned Cornelius Brandt as the architect of a failed bomb plot targeting several financial institutions, thwarted just days before Christmas. No word of Gruber, Lenz, or the astronomical engineering that nearly turned Chicago into a crater. Just a neat, simple tale of justice delivered. But Allan Pinkerton knew the truth. It was a crisp December morning when he returned to Brandt's personal estate, now sealed by government order. Federal agents had already confiscated ledgers, papers, and mechanical models. But Pinkerton came for something else. Inside Brandt's private library, a room lined with tomes of mechanical design and foreign correspondence, Pinkerton found a hidden cabinet behind a false shelf. Inside were more photographs, including one of Ernest Gruber as a young man, shaking hands with Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria. Another showed Brandt standing beside a table-sized model of a gear-driven city, labeled in German, Zeitwaffe, time weapon. Among the files was a final letter, dated just 2 days before the failed detonation. To the Prague buyer. The mechanism is flawless. The delay gears respond to lunar phases and resonance calculations. Once both vaults activate simultaneously, no one will trace it. The explosion will appear as infrastructure failure. Payment to be received in Vienna post-detonation. CB. Payment post-detonation, Pinkerton muttered. No concern for casualties. Just legacy, and profit. He pocketed the letter and returned to the city, where Hiram and Elise waited at the agency. Elise had made her decision: she would return to Bavaria, reclaim her uncle's name, and ensure his remaining papers never fell into the wrong hands again. Pinkerton saw her off at the train station. "You were brave," he said. "He'd be proud." She smiled faintly. "And you were more than just a detective. You saw the danger before anyone else. You listened." As the train pulled away, Pinkerton stood on the icy platform long after the whistle faded, watching until the horizon swallowed her silhouette. Back at the agency, Hiram placed a small box on Pinkerton's desk. "What's this?" Pinkerton asked. Hiram opened it. Inside was the original silver gear key, now mounted in a velvet case. "A souvenir?" Pinkerton raised a brow. Hiram shrugged. "A reminder that even time itself can be twisted, but also corrected." Pinkerton nodded, staring at the intricate, precise teeth of the gear. "One wrong turn," he said, "and we wouldn't be here." He stood, taking the key and placing it into the top drawer of his desk. He shut it gently. Later that evening, as gas lamps flickered outside and snow began to fall once more, Pinkerton wrote the final line in his case ledger. The mechanism was brilliant, but the man behind it was careless with time, believing he could command the heavens. But justice doesn't follow stars. It follows reason. And reason will always win. He closed the book, locked his drawer, and turned off the light. Chicago slept safely that night.